Somewhere in a muddy logging deck right now, a machine older than the operator running it is dragging a load of timber. It has no business still moving, no touch screens, no emission sensors, no factory left to call, just steel, diesel, and stubbornness. While a lot of today's forestry iron gets retired around 12,000 hours, these 1980s survivors keep clocking 20,000 and grinning. Here are 10 forestry machines from the 1980s that simply refuse to die, and why loggers won't let them. Number 10. The Clark Ranger Skidder. Let's start with a machine that loggers still describe as one of the Cadillacs of its era. The Clark Ranger was built by Clark Equipment, a company that made its name on rugged drivetrains and power shift transmissions, and the Ranger carried that DNA straight into the timber. What set the Ranger apart in the 1980s wasn't horsepower bragging rights, it was how forgiving and operator-friendly it was. Power shift transmissions and strong drivetrains meant you could pull a heavy line of logs uphill all day without babying the machine, and that ease of operation is exactly why so many of them are still earning a living decades later. Loggers who came up running 6 levers and 3 pedals on bare-bones skidders talk about the Ranger like stepping into a luxury car. Here's the part that makes the Ranger a true survivor story. The brand simply would not die, even as its corporate parents shuffled it around. The Ranger line passed from Clark to VME, then to Valmet, then to Allied Systems before skidder production eventually wound down. Every one of those handoffs could have killed the design. Instead, the machines kept rolling off into the woods, and the older Clark-built units developed a reputation as some of the most dependable mid-size skidders of the decade. Today you'll find Clark Rangers, particularly the 600 series units, still being bought, sold, and rebuilt. Parts interchangeability and a thick aftermarket keep them viable. When a 40-year-old skidder is worth retiring, rechaining, and putting back on the landing instead of scrapping, that tells you everything about how it was built. The Ranger earns its spot at number 10 not because it was flashy, but because it quietly refused to become obsolete. Number 9. The Tree Farmer C-Series. Before Tree Farmer was a Franklin product, it was one of the names that basically invented the modern rubber-tired skidder. The lineage traces back to Garrett, who first popularized the small, light rubber-tired skidder, and the brand was later built in Canada by Canadian Car, which is why old-timers up north still call them Can-Car Tree Farmers. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Tree Farmer C-Series, and especially the C5 and C5D, became one of the most popular skidders in the woods, from the wilds of Maine all the way to logging shows in France. The machines famously switched from orange to that signature lime green around 1974, and by the early 80s they were everywhere. Now, the C-Series is not a comfortable machine by modern standards, and the loggers who ran them are the first to admit it. You operated them with a fistful of levers and a footful of pedals. One logger half-joked it had 6 levers and 3 pedals, and you needed all 4 hands and feet just to keep the thing moving and the main line from crossing up. But here's the trade-off that made it immortal. It is one of the easiest skidders ever made to service and get parts for. The prices stay reasonable, and it packs one of the strongest 20-ton winches in the business. That combination, dead simple mechanics, cheap parts, and a brutally strong winch, is the recipe for a machine that never really dies. A bare-bones design has very little to go wrong, and what does go wrong, a logger can fix in the field with hand tools. Many C-Series machines from that era are still cutting cedar and pulling pulpwood today, often with engines like the Detroit Diesel 453 that themselves became legends for taking abuse. When Franklin bought the Tree Farmer Skidder division in 1990, they kept the line alive for another 20 years, proof that a good 1980s design can outlast the company that made it. Number 8. The John Deere 540B. Ask 100 loggers to name a bulletproof mid-size skidder, and a huge number of them will say the same 3 words: John Deere 540B. This is the machine that for an entire generation defined what a dependable skidder looked like. John Deere broke into the skidder market back in the mid-1960s with the 440 cable skidder, and by the time the 540B arrived and carried through the 1980s, Deere had refined the formula. The 540B ran a stout 6-cylinder Deere diesel, a simple and reliable hydraulic system, and critically, it was easy to repair in remote locations. When you're broken down 20 miles back on a skid road, Easy to fix in the woods isn't a luxury, it's the whole ballgame, and that design philosophy is exactly why the 540B is still respected today. The stories back it up. There are loggers who bought a brand new 540B in the 1980s, ran it for years, then sold it to their own kids to start the next generation's logging company, the same machine launching 2 careers. That's not nostalgia talking, that's a depreciation schedule measured in decades. To be fair and accurate, the 540B wasn't indestructible. The men who wrenched on them will tell you the final drives were a common failure point. And the factory Deere winches could be a weak spot. Some buyers swapped in cargo or gearmatic winches that held up better. But here's the thing about a machine that's easy to fix. A known weak point isn't a death sentence. Rebuild kits, swappable winches, and the fact that a lot of Deere farm tractor parts interchange with the skidders meant owners could keep them running cheaply. 4 decades on, the 540B remains one of the most sought-after used cable skidders in North America, a true workhorse that refuses to retire. Number 7. The Caterpillar 518. If the John Deere was the people's skidder, the Caterpillar 518 was the deluxe machine, the one that cost more up front but rewarded you with a drivetrain that seemingly would not quit. Cat introduced the 518 around the turn of the 1970s, and the design carried right through the 1980s before evolving into the 518C. At the heart of the 518 sat the Caterpillar 3304 diesel, a 4-cylinder engine that became almost mythical for its toughness, backed by Caterpillar's famously overbuilt powertrain. Loggers described the 518 as a deluxe premium machine in its day, and the price reflected it. But you got what you paid for: an articulated frame, a strong power shift, and components engineered with Caterpillar's signature heavy hand. Want proof these things refuse to die? Look at the hour meters. It's not unusual to find 518s and 518Cs still for sale today, showing numbers like 13,000 or even over 19,000 logged hours and still listed as running and operating. Think about that. Many machines of any kind never see 19,000 hours. These skidders crossed that line and kept going, often only needing seals, gaskets, and the occasional rebuild along the way. The 518's survival is also a story about parts and support. Because Caterpillar standardized so many components across its equipment lines, and because the 3304 engine was used in everything from chippers to generators, finding parts to keep a 518 alive remains realistic decades later. You'll see them today with rebuilt motors, fresh transmissions, swamp tires, and new chains. Owners investing real money in a 40-plus-year-old machine because the bones are simply that good. The Cat 518 earns number 7 by being the rare machine that justified its premium price by outliving the loggers who skeptically wrote the check. Number 6. The Timberjack 240. Now we get to a true icon. If there is a single skidder that loggers across the world point to as the definition of "they don't make 'em like they used to," it's the Timberjack 240. The Timberjack story starts in the 1950s in Woodstock, Ontario, where engineers Wes McGill and Robert Simons built articulated 4-wheel drive tractors designed specifically for skidding timber machines that genuinely helped revolutionize logging efficiency. The 240 series arrived in the mid-1970s and became a staple of North American logging right through the 1980s, prized for its articulated frame, high power-to-weight ratio, low center of gravity, and rock-solid stability on slopes. What makes the 240 legendary is what loggers call the last real Timberjack. After Timberjack changed hands, a 1984 leveraged buyout from Eaton Corporation, then acquisition by Finland's Rama Repola in 1989, and eventually absorption into John Deere, purists insist the 240C was the final machine that was pure Timberjack before the lineup essentially became Green Deere's. That status turned the 240 into a cult classic that owners refuse to let go of, and these machines run forever. Part of the secret is that the 240 was offered with a menu of bomb-proof engines over its life. Detroit Diesel 453s, 4-cylinder Cummins, even Deutz air-cooled diesels, and a tough Eaton axle, gearmatic winch driveline. You'll find 240s today with rebuilt engines, tight center sections, and decades of service that are still described as woods-ready. Some surface with surprisingly low original hours because they were so overbuilt that owners barely stressed them. The 240's stick steering setup wasn't for everyone. Plenty of operators couldn't stand it, but the men who mastered it talk about going anywhere. through any terrain, like the machine was an extension of their own body. When a skidder inspires that kind of loyalty 4 decades later, and when Timberjack 240 still moves the needle at every used equipment auction, you know you're looking at a survivor. This one absolutely refuses to die. Number 5. The Hydro-Axe Feller Buncher. So far, we've talked about machines that drag wood. Now let's talk about the machines that cut it down. And few names in mechanized felling are as durable, literally and figuratively, as Hydro-Axe. Hydro-Axe built wheeled feller bunches, the agile 4-wheeled machines that grab a standing tree, shear or saw it off at the base, and stack it in a neat bunch for the skidder. In the 1980s, as the industry pushed hard toward full mechanization to handle smaller trees and bigger volumes, the wheeled feller buncher became the tip of the spear, and Hydro-Axe was one of the brands that defined the category alongside names like Franklin, Timberjack, and Barco. The reason Hydro-Axe makes this list is the staggering evidence of its survivability, sitting in salvage yards and on landings across the American South. There are equipment yards down there with dozens of dismantled Hydro-Axe feller bunches spread across more than 13 acres, not because the machines failed, but because the demand for their parts is so relentless that keeping the older units alive is a whole industry unto itself. Saw heads, axles, wheel ends, differentials, hydrostats, pump drives. There's a thriving parts ecosystem precisely because so many 1980s and 90s Hydro-Axe bunches are still working. The brand's toughness was recognized by the industry in the most telling way possible. In 2006, the legendary Prentice name was applied to the Hydro-Axe wheel feller buncher line, folding that proven durable design into one of the most respected names in forestry. When a company wants to put its best-known badge on something, it picks the machine that already has a reputation for not breaking. A feller buncher lives a violent life, constant shearing, slamming, twisting, and stacking, all day in mud and rock. That a 1980s Hydro-Axe can still do that work, supported by an enormous aftermarket and a design good enough to wear a flagship name decades later, is exactly why it lands at number 5. Number 4. The Prentice knuckleboom loader. Every load of logs that leaves the woods on a truck has to be picked up and placed there by something, and for more than half a century, an enormous share of that lifting has been done by a Prentice knuckleboom loader. The Prentice story comes down to one phrase from its founder, Leo Heikkinen, that the company still quotes to this day. His machines were built better than they need to be. That's not a marketing slogan invented later. That was the actual engineering philosophy, and you can feel it in every overspec'd pin, bushing, and cylinder on a 1980s Prentice loader. For over 60 years, Prentice has carried a reputation as one of the most reliable and durable log loaders in the entire industry. The knuckleboom loader is a deceptively brutal job. A loader sits on the deck and works thousands of grab-lift swing-release cycles every single day, snatching heavy logs, slewing them, and stacking them, repeating that motion endlessly while exposed to weather, dirt, and constant shock loading through the hydraulics. A loader that's only good enough gets worn out fast. One that's built better than it needs to be just keeps swinging. That over-engineering is exactly why 1980s Prentice loaders are still in service and still command real money on the used market. The hydraulic systems were simple and serviceable. The steel was heavy, and the design was proven over decades of refinement. The reputation was so strong that when the brand's corporate owners reorganized the product line in the mid-2000s, they deliberately moved the Prentice name onto their other harvesting machines because the Prentice badge itself signaled durability to loggers. When a forestry brand's founding promise is literally overbuilt, and the machines spend 40 years proving him right one log at a time, that's a textbook member of the Refuse to Die Club. Prentice takes number 4. Number 3. The Morbark Chiparvestor. Time to make some noise. The Morbark Chiparvestor, the whole tree chipper, is one of the most over-engineered pieces of forestry equipment ever built, and the company that makes it will flat out tell you there's no reason one shouldn't run for 30 years or more. Morbark was founded back in 1957, and in the early 1970s it changed the industry by introducing the world's first portable whole tree disc chipper. The trigger was a disaster, the Dutch elm disease epidemic that swept the United States starting in 1972, leaving millions of dead trees that somebody had to dispose of. Morbark's answer was a machine that could swallow whole trees and turn them into clean, uniform chips, and the Chiparvestor was born. Here's why it belongs on this list. Morbark openly admits that, in its own words, it tended to overbuild its machines for heavy-duty work, and that overbuilding is exactly what makes the old ones such good candidates for restoration today. Mid-1980s Chiparvestors, including Model 290s and the big whole tree units, still come back to the factory for rehab, sometimes with engines showing 10,000 hours, and get put right back to work. The factory keeps a full supply of components for essentially everything it has ever built, with original blueprints going all the way back to hand drawings, so a part for a 1985 chipper can be manufactured fresh exactly as it was made the first time. Think about the violence of the job. A disc chipper from this era might spin a steel disc several inches thick, weighing thousands of pounds, devouring whole trees against a fixed anvil hour after hour. The forces involved are enormous, and a machine that survives that for decades has to be built like a tank from the ground up. Many 1980s Morbarks ran tough industrial engines, Caterpillar, Hercules, Ford, that themselves go the distance. When the manufacturer itself says 30 years is normal, and backs it by remanufacturing parts from original drawings, you found a machine engineered specifically to refuse to die. Morbark roars in at number 3. Number 2. The Bell Tri-Wheel Logger. For number 2, we leave North America and Scandinavia entirely and head to South Africa, to a machine that's so simple, so clever, and so tough that it became the industry standard across an entire hemisphere. The Bell three-wheeled logger came from the mind of Irvine Bell, a self-taught engineer who started out repairing farm machinery on a sugar estate in KwaZulu-Natal. His breakthrough was a whole new class of machine, a tri-wheeled loader using emerging hydrostatic technology. With hydraulic motors he borrowed from an old motor grader that could drive each of its big wheels independently. The result could spin instantly on its own axis, and the controls were so intuitive that operators with zero machinery experience could pick it up quickly. Originally built to load sugarcane, the design was adapted into the logger for forestry. That simplicity is the whole secret to its longevity. Bell loggers have always been known as quite simple yet extremely robust machines, and that's precisely why they became the industry standard as a loading and timber handling tool across South Africa and beyond. There's just not much to break. A simple, rugged hydrostatic drive and a strong frame mean these machines absorb decades of abuse and keep working. By the early 1980s, the tri-wheel loader range had outgrown its original factory, and in 1984, Bell commissioned a custom-built plant in Richards Bay. The design found markets abroad, with assembly facilities feeding New Zealand's forest industry and a partnership bringing American versions of the logger to the United States, including, in the early 80s, a tie-up with Morbark to introduce the first three-wheel feller buncher to the U.S. market. You can still find Bell loggers of serious age working and selling on the used market today, and the basic three-wheel concept survived in production for decades. A machine humble enough to be learned in an afternoon and tough enough to define an industry for 40 years is the definition of a survivor. The Bell logger takes number 2. Number 1. The Ponsse S15 forwarder. And at number 1, the machine that didn't just survive. It launched a global empire and proved that lightweight and bulletproof aren't opposites. This is the Ponsse S15 forwarder. To understand the S15, you have to understand the man. Einari Vidgren started working logging sites with a frame saw in 1957 at the age of 14. By the late 1960s, he'd built his own load-carrying forest tractor in a village forge, naming it after a scruffy, ugly, but utterly relentless local hunting dog called Ponsse, because, like the dog, the machine never came back empty-handed. In 1970, he founded a factory in the tiny village of Vieramäe, Finland. In that entire first decade, the factory built only about 50 forest tractors. Money was scarce and setbacks were constant. Then came 1983, and the machine that changed everything, the legendary Ponsse S15 forwarder. While competitors built heavy, the S15 was built partly from aluminum, which made its frame dramatically lighter than rivals. The numbers were almost unbelievable for the era. The machine weighed roughly 10 metric tons, but could carry a 12-ton load, with a tractive power of about 14.1 tons that matched far larger machines. That meant it could work soft, low-bearing ground where heavier forwarders would sink and tear up the forest floor, and it left a noticeably lighter footprint at a time when the public was just starting to demand gentler machines in the woods. The S15 put Ponsse on the map overnight and became a class of its own for off-road performance. It proved the cut-to-length philosophy. Felling, delimbing, and bucking right at the stump could be done with machines that were both productive and durable. That foundation built a company that today manufactures forest machines in roughly 40 countries, all still from that same village of Virama, with tens of thousands of machines produced. This S15 refuses to die in the most meaningful way of all. Its DNA is in every Ponsse working on Earth right now. A clever, lightweight, overbuilt 1980s forwarder didn't just outlast its decade. It became the cornerstone of one of the largest forest machine makers in the world. That's why the Ponsse S15 is number one. Which of these did you run? Or which one's still sitting on your landing? Drop it in the comments. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the iron that built the timber industry. Thanks for watching.